Mark, the 12th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
As Jesus taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearances say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." And he sat down opposite the treasury, and he watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. And many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins. They are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples, and he said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has to put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
In this month's newsletter, if you've looked at it, I wrote an article called First Encounter. I call it First Encounter over and against the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I loved, by the way. I thought this was a really great movie. But First Encounters are something that you don't really read in a book. The first encounter is actually with another human being. And in that newsletter article, I wrote about my first encounter, not with reading about the Holocaust, but actually meeting a Jewish lady who escaped the concentration camp, and how she spent the rest of her life after coming to the United States having to tell the story of her survival. It was a first encounter that had a lasting effect on me, because now it wasn't pages or words on a page, it was a human being. So I want to bring you another first encounter that I had at a time when I was in the novitiate of the Braymore Friars, and we were called twice a year to go visit people who were being serviced by the Little Sisters of the Poor in Providence, Rhode Island. And so a bunch of friars would go over and we'd get to know some of the people, just kind of wander around, say hello. And I saw a woman who was sitting looking out a window, very elderly, very frail. And one of the sisters came up to me and she said to me, "She is worthy of your attention." And so I went over and I pulled up a chair and I told her who I was, and she told me who she was. Mary McGuire. And this is in the year 1965, and she's 90 years old, so she's born in 1875, of poor Irish parents in Boston. And if you know any history during that time, the influx of Irish people coming over from the famine were not welcomed by the then gentry Anglos. You may recall that even the want ads in the Boston papers would say, "No Irish need apply." And so her parents struggled, and she dropped out of school in the 8th grade because they needed the money that she could make. And she made money throughout her whole life as a domestic. She cleaned other people's houses. She never married. And at 90 years of age, all her living relatives were gone. All her friends were gone. After hearing that story, I thought, I have just had a first encounter with poverty that I've never seen before. Surely she got wonderful care from the Little Sisters of the Poor. But there was a sense of isolation in her life that was heartbreaking. So I kind of latched onto her, and I got permission to go and see her once a month, simply because somehow we were getting connected. I wasn't sure how this connection was happening, but it was happening. And after about a year, I received notice that I was being transferred to New York House. So on that day, I decided to make my one last visit to Mary McGuire. And I brought her a big bouquet of flowers and told her that I'm sorry, but I'm being transferred. I probably won't see you again. And she looked at me and she said, "God sent you to me." And I stood there totally humiliated, because the reality was, of course, God sent her to me. She didn't see it that way. But the strange thing is, as I looked at the text of the gospel this morning, talk about deja vu. As Jesus said, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes. And there I stood in my long Franciscan robe. And to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. You would have thought we were the next closest thing to Jesus to those people in our long robes. The best seats in the synagogue, places of honor at banquets, the luncheon that's prepared for us by the Little Sisters of the Poor because we good friars had come over to see the poor. And as I look at the text this morning, realizing the great disparity there was at that time between Mary McGuire and myself. But as time goes on, first encounters like that become richer and deeper, especially as you get older and you hear more and more gospel stories. And suddenly you can read yourself into them. And I think everybody does, if you kind of look back upon your life. And the more gospel stories you know, the deeper you can come into what it is to be a baptized Christian. And sometimes, when you read about the poor, and I've read about them all my life, I can't read about it with the words not nearly as the impact of meeting Mary McGuire. Those first encounters, not with words on a page, but with human beings. It is our lot in life to be professed Christians to stop and think about what we remember about all of the stories of Jesus' encounters with other people. Recall as you do and as you look at them, those encounters never left those people unchanged. Mary McGuire was suddenly changed because somehow she saw in my presence God coming to her. But the reality was it was a two-way street because God was coming to me in all his poverty, in all his lowliness, all his marginalizing, in the woman of a 90-year-old woman whose life has been taken away from everything she ever knew and ever loved. So as we, as a community, think about what we want to do and how we want to reach out, every now and then, it won't be just here and in the church. It may be as you walk through life that you will have a first encounter. And that first encounter will impact you if you have a whole group of memories out of the stories of Jesus, to recall them, to have them part of your very thinking. And when you do, suddenly you discover what a first encounter can be. It's often said that our ultimate encounters are death and coming face to face with what love is all about. But I do think that while we're still walking here on the earth, that we ought to be very careful about walking into those encounters in which we see the face of Christ. Could I see the face of Christ in 90-year-old Mary McGuire's face? I didn't know it at the time. But time does take its toll, and if you just hear the stories over and over again, you discover that they're out there all over the place. So here it is in this whole story. That's my first encounter with poverty. My first encounter with a Jewish woman who escaped the Holocaust. What will be your first encounter, and will you be ready? And I think it's very important for all of us, not just to hear the gospel on a Sunday morning, but to sit down someday and say, what are the stories that I remember out of Scripture that will prepare me for that possible first encounter when all of a sudden Christ will appear in the face of a survivor, in the face of a woman of poverty, or in the face of someone who may be waiting